Question, the member from Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question to the acting Premier. Nearly 20 years ago, the Conservatives downloaded responsibility for social housing to the municipalities. They had no way to pay for it. This action created a permanent crisis for affordable housing, most acutely in Toronto. Instead of fixing this crisis, the Premier made things worse by cutting $129 million per year in annual funding for Toronto's housing programs. Half of Toronto community housing homes will reach quote-unquote critical status within 5 years due to a lack of funding for capital repairs. The NDP has repeatedly urged the province to fund 1/3 of those capital repair costs. Will the Premier do that and undo at least part of the damage her cuts have caused?
Deputy Premier.
Minister of Housing.
Minister of Housing.
Well, thank you, Speaker. You know, Speaker, every Ontarian deserves to have an affordable and safe place to call home. We know that people's lives are better when they do. And that's why, Speaker, this government has invested $1.4 billion in the City of Toronto for affordable and sustainable housing. That's $1.4 billion, Speaker, and we're continuing to build on these investments. You know, Speaker, over the next 5 years, we're investing an additional $173 million in social housing repairs and retrofits in the City of Toronto. Things like $43 million for repairs and retrofits to social housing, another $130 million in additional funding for social housing repairs in Toronto over the next 40 years. So, Speaker, this government gets how important this housing is to residents of the City of Toronto. We're on it.
Supplementary.
Speaker, again to the acting Premier. By 2019, Toronto City staff estimate that provincial funding for Toronto's housing programs will have been cut by nearly 60% from 2011. This Premier is responsible for most of these cuts. The Premier's cuts mean that thousands of Toronto families risk losing their homes due to disrepair. No other government in Canada or the developed world ignores its social responsibility to fund social housing programs the way this Premier has. Will the Premier stop, reverse her funding cuts, and fund the province's fair 1/3 share of TCHC's capital repair costs?
Minister.
Well, thank you, Speaker. You know, I enjoyed this opportunity to get up and talk about the importance of social housing, affordable housing in the City of Toronto, and to reiterate time and again the significant, massive investments that the province has made in the City of Toronto. I'll just name the high-level one again, Speaker, $1.4 billion. That's not anyone walking away from their responsibility to the City of Toronto. Speaker, I welcome Toronto Council's 10-year commitment of about $200 million in funding and tax exemptions. That's good to go towards this. It's also good to have the federal government at the table. You know, through the National Housing Strategy, they'll be allocating $11 billion over 11 years across 13 provinces and territories. But what we've done, Speaker, is we continue to invest. In fact, we've just announced $100 million in land in the City of Toronto.